There is a silence that speaks louder than arguments, louder than closure, louder than goodbye texts that go on for pages. When a woman chooses to move on without saying a word, it creates a kind of emotional vacuum that many men are not prepared for. No warning, no explanation, just absence. And in that absence, something powerful happens. He is left alone with his thoughts, his memories, and the reality he didn't see coming. This isn't about revenge or playing games. It's about emotional shifts, self-worth, and the unspoken language of walking away. Understanding how a man feels in that moment isn't just curiosity. It's insight into emotional behavior, attachment, and the psychology of connection. For women, this knowledge becomes power, not to manipulate, but to move with clarity, strength, and self-respect. When you walk away without saying a word, something unusual happens inside his mind. There's no final conversation to anchor his understanding. No clear moment he can point to and say, that's when it ended. Instead, you leave behind a kind of silence that refuses to explain itself. And that silence becomes louder with every passing day. It sits with him when he's alone, it follows him when he's distracted, and it shows up in the quiet moments he can't escape. At first, he may not react the way you expect. He might seem unaffected, even indifferent. That's because confusion often disguises itself as calm. When someone is used to having emotional control, or at least the illusion of it, they don't immediately process what they don't understand. He may assume you'll come back, that this is temporary, that maybe you just need space. But as time stretches and your absence remains consistent, that's when the questions begin. And these aren't simple questions. These are the kind that loop endlessly without resolution. Why didn't she say anything? Was she unhappy for a long time? Did I miss something important? Was there a moment I should handle differently? These thoughts don't come all at once. They come in waves. Sometimes when he's scrolling through his phone and notices your name isn't popping up anymore. Sometimes when something reminds him of you, a place, a song, a habit you shared. And sometimes when everything is quiet and there's nothing left to distract him. The hardest part for him isn't just that you're gone, it's that he doesn't fully understand why. When someone is given an explanation, even if it's painful, it provides closure. It creates a boundary around the ending. But when you leave without words, there's no boundary. The ending feels open, unfinished. And because it feels unfinished, his mind keeps trying to complete it. He starts replaying memories, not in a nostalgic way at first, but in an investigative way. He goes back to conversations, trying to find hidden meanings. He rethinks moments where you seemed distant, wondering if that was the beginning of the end. He questions his own behavior, even the things he once felt confident about. And this is something he can't easily escape because the answers aren't available to him. You didn't give him the script. You didn't provide the explanation. So now he's forced to write his own, and he's not sure if he's getting it right. This is where your silence becomes powerful, not in a manipulative sense, but in a deeply human one. You're no longer participating in the cycle of over-explaining yourself, of trying to be understood by someone who may not have been listening before. You've stepped out of that dynamic completely, and by doing so, you've shifted the emotional responsibility back onto him. For a woman, this moment is often misunderstood. Walking away without saying anything isn't about being cold or avoiding communication. It usually comes after many attempts, after conversations that went nowhere, after feelings that were dismissed, after moments where you tried to express yourself and didn't feel heard. The silence isn't the beginning of the story. It's the final chapter. It's what happens when you realize that explaining yourself one more time won't change anything. But from his perspective, he doesn't always see that history clearly. He experiences the silence without fully acknowledging what led to it. And that's why it unsettles him. Because now, instead of reacting to your words, he has to reflect on his actions. Instead of responding in the moment, he has to sit with the aftermath. There's also a loss of control that comes with this. When relationships end with conversation, there's often a back and forth. There's negotiation, persuasion, sometimes even attempts to fix things. But when you leave quietly, you remove all of that. You don't give him a chance to argue his case or promise change in the heat of the moment. And that can feel disorienting, especially if he's someone who relied on those moments to maintain connection. Over time, the silence starts to shift from confusion to realization. Not immediately and not always completely, but gradually. He begins to understand that your absence wasn't random, that it meant something, that it came from a place of decision, not impulse. And that's when the weight of it starts to settle in a different way, because now it's not just about unanswered questions. It's about the possibility that those answers might not have been in his favor, that maybe there were things he overlooked, that maybe you reached a point where staying no longer made sense for you. And those are difficult realizations to face, especially when they come without warning. For you, this is where your strength quietly stands. You didn't need to create a dramatic ending to prove your point. You didn't need to raise your voice to be heard. You made a decision and you followed through with it. And while he's left trying to piece together what happened, you've already begun moving forward. That's the difference. While he's searching for clarity in the silence, you found yours before you left. When you disappear without warning, what he feels first isn't always heartbreak, it's disruption. It's the sudden break in a pattern he had grown used to. The texts that used to come in the morning don't show up anymore. The random check-ins throughout the day are gone. The emotional availability he could rely on, whether he acknowledged it or not, is no longer there. And at first, he may not label this as missing you. He just feels something is off. Human beings are creatures of habit, especially in relationships. Even when a man isn't fully expressive or emotionally present, he still becomes accustomed to the consistency you bring. Your presence becomes part of his routine in ways he doesn't consciously track. Maybe you were the one who remembered important dates, who asked how his day went, who noticed when something felt different about him. Those small, seemingly ordinary acts create a sense of stability. And when that stability disappears overnight, it creates a gap he can't immediately fill. Initially, he might try to brush it off. He tells himself he's just busy, that this is nothing serious. He may even lean into distractions, spending more time with friends, focusing on work, scrolling endlessly on his phone, anything that keeps him from sitting still long enough to notice the silence. Because the moment he slows down, the absence becomes more noticeable. And here's the part many women don't realize. The absence of access often hits before the emotional understanding does. He doesn't immediately process that he's lost you as a person. He processes that he's lost what came with you. The attention, the care, the familiarity. That immediate availability you once provided is no longer there, and that creates discomfort. He might reach for his phone out of habit, expecting to see your name, and when it's not there, there's a subtle pause. Not dramatic, not overwhelming, but enough to register. Over time, those small pauses start to add up. The routine he once took for granted now feels incomplete. This is when he may attempt to replace what's missing. Not necessarily with another person in a meaningful way, but with substitutes. More conversations with others, more noise, more activity. But here's the truth about emotional connection. It's not easily replaceable. You can fill time, but you can't duplicate the specific way someone made you feel. Because what made your presence valuable wasn't just that you were there. It was how you showed up. The way you listened when he spoke. The way you understood things he didn't always explain clearly. The way you gave attention without making it feel like a transaction. Those qualities aren't generic. They're personal. And when they're gone, the difference becomes noticeable. Even if he can't immediately articulate why. As days pass, the distractions start losing their effectiveness. The conversations with others don't carry the same depth. The attention he receives doesn't feel as natural. And slowly the realization begins to form, not all at once, but in pieces. He starts to recognize that what he lost wasn't just convenience, it was connection. There's a certain kind of silence that comes from losing someone who truly understood you. It's not loud or dramatic, it's subtle. It shows up in moments when something happens and you instinctively think of sharing it with that person. But then remember, they're no longer there. And that's when the absence feels real. He begins to notice that no one quite responds the way you did. No one picks up on the same details. No one offers the same kind of comfort. And while he may have once seen those things as small or insignificant, now they stand out in their absence. This is where the shift happens. The focus moves from something is missing to someone is missing. And that someone is you. But by the time this realization starts to settle, you've already moved into a different space. You're no longer available in the way you once were. You're no longer filling the gaps in his day or providing the emotional consistency he relied on. And that's what makes it different this time, because now it's not about him deciding whether he values you. It's about him realizing your value after you're no longer there to give it. For you, this carries an important lesson. Your presence was never ordinary, even if it was treated that way. The things you did, the way you cared, the consistency you offered, those were contributions, not obligations. And when you remove them, it's not just your absence that's felt. It's the absence of everything you brought into that space. Walking away silently doesn't mean you didn't care. It means you reached a point where your care was no longer being met with the same level of awareness or appreciation. And instead of continuing to give in a space that didn't fully recognize you, you chose to step back. What he experiences afterward is not just loss, it's contrast. The difference between having access to you and not having it anymore. The difference between being understood and feeling slightly disconnected. The difference between consistency and uncertainty. And contrast is powerful. It reveals things that presence often hides. When something is always there, it's easy to overlook its value. But when it's gone, the space it leaves behind becomes a reminder of what it once meant. He may not say it out loud. He may not even fully admit it to himself right away. But in those quiet moments, when the distractions fade and the routine feels incomplete, he feels it. Not just that you're gone, but that what you gave is no longer within his reach. And that's when understanding begins to take shape. When you walk away without saying a word, it doesn't just create confusion, it hits a place most people don't openly talk about. Ego. Not arrogance in the loud, obvious sense, but the quiet inner belief many men carry about their role in a relationship. The expectation that if something ends, they'll see it coming, that they'll have a say in it, that they'll be part of the final conversation. When you remove that completely, it disrupts something deeper than emotion. It disrupts identity. At first, he may not even recognize it as an ego hit. He might frame it as irritation or disbelief. Why didn't she say anything? Why would she just disappear like that? But underneath those questions is something more personal. It's the realization that you made a decision without involving him, that you chose to leave without needing his approval, his reaction, or his understanding in that moment. And that can feel unfamiliar, especially if he was used to a dynamic where he held more emotional control. There's a subtle expectation many people have in relationships that endings come with discussion. Even if things fall apart, there's usually a final exchange, a chance to explain, defend, or at least be heard. When that doesn't happen, it creates a sense of being left out of something he assumed he would be part of. Not just the relationship, but the ending of it. And that's where the discomfort begins to grow. He may start questioning why you didn't fight for it in a visible way, why there wasn't another conversation, another attempt, another moment where things could have been addressed. From his perspective, silence can look like detachment, like you didn't care enough to say something. But what he doesn't immediately see is that your silence wasn't the absence of effort. It was the result of it. Because most of the time, a woman doesn't just wake up and decide to leave without a word. There were likely moments before that, times you tried to communicate, times you expressed concerns, times you hoped things would shift. And when those moments didn't lead to change, something inside you began to quiet down. Not because you stopped caring, but because you started understanding. He doesn't always have access to that internal process. So when you finally leave, it feels sudden to him, unexpected. And that's what challenges his sense of control. Because now, instead of reacting to something in real time, he's reacting to something that has already happened. The decision has been made. The distance has been created. And he didn't get the chance to influence it. That lack of control can be uncomfortable, not necessarily in a dramatic way, but in a way that lingers. He may replay the situation, trying to figure out where things shifted, but there's no clear moment he can point to, no argument he can revisit, no final conversation he can analyze for clues. And without those reference points, his usual way of processing doesn't fully work. This is where the ego begins to feel unsettled. Not because he wanted things to end, but because he didn't expect to be left out of the ending. It challenges the idea that he would always be aware, always be involved, always have some level of influence. And now he's faced with the reality where that wasn't the case. He might start to wonder why you didn't reach out one last time, why you didn't give him the opportunity to respond, to explain, or to try again. But what he doesn't always recognize is that for you, that opportunity may have already existed, just in earlier moments that didn't lead to the outcome you needed. From your side, the silence wasn't about proving a point. It was about reaching one. It was about understanding that repeating the same conversations wouldn't create a different result. That continuing to explain yourself wouldn't necessarily lead to being understood in a deeper way. And instead of staying in that cycle, you chose to step out of it. That choice can feel unfamiliar to him because it removes the usual rhythm of conflict and resolution. There's no back and forth, no gradual winding down, just a clear shift. And that clarity, even without words, carries weight. Over time, the initial irritation or confusion may start to change. Not into immediate understanding, but into reflection. He may begin to consider the possibility that your silence wasn't random, that it came from somewhere real, somewhere that had been building over time, and that's when the ego starts to soften. Not completely, but enough to allow a different kind of thinking. Less about why you didn't say anything, and more about what might have led you to feel like saying something wouldn't matter anymore. That shift doesn't happen overnight. It comes in moments, in quiet realizations, in the absence of the dynamic he once relied on. And while he may not express it openly, there's an internal adjustment taking place. A recognition that not everything needs to end with noise to be meaningful. For you, this is where your growth becomes visible, not through explanation, but through action. You didn't stay in a space where you felt unheard. You didn't keep repeating yourself in hopes of a different response. You made a decision based on what you experienced, and you followed through with it. That kind of clarity doesn't always look loud or dramatic. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like walking away without needing to justify every step. And while that may challenge someone else's expectations, it aligns with your own understanding of what you needed. He may take time to fully grasp that. He may never articulate it in a clear way, but the impact is there. In the way the ending felt different, in the way it made him think, in the way it disrupted what he assumed he knew about control and connection. And in that disruption, there's a quiet lesson, not just for him, but for you as well. That choosing yourself doesn't always come with explanation. Sometimes it comes with the strength to leave without one. Time has a way of doing what silence begins. In the early days after you leave, everything can feel scattered on his end. Confusion, distraction, maybe even denial. But as the days stretch into weeks, and the weeks quietly turn into months, something shifts. The noise fades, the distractions lose their grip, And what's left is space. Space where your presence used to be. That's when the weight of it starts to settle in. Not all at once, but slowly, like something sinking beneath the surface. At first, he may not recognize it as loss in a deep emotional sense. It might show up as a passing thought, a brief memory, a moment where something reminds him of you. Maybe it's a place you both used to go, a habit you shared, or even something small like the way you used to respond to certain things he said. These moments don't feel heavy right away. They come and go. But over time, they begin to linger a little longer. What changes is not just the frequency of these memories, but the way he experiences them. In the beginning, they might feel neutral or even dismissible. But as time passes, they start to carry a different kind of weight. He begins to notice not just that you were there, but how you were there. The consistency, the effort, the quiet ways you showed up without needing recognition. And now in your absence, those things stand out more clearly than they ever did before. There's a difference between remembering someone and understanding them. At first, he remembers you in fragments, moments, conversations, snapshots of time. But as the silence continues, those fragments start to connect. He begins to see patterns. He starts to recognize things he may have overlooked while you were still present. Not because he suddenly changed overnight, but because distance creates perspective. Without the day-to-day interaction, there's no immediate response to rely on, no ongoing dynamic to distract from reflection. He's no longer reacting to you in real time. Instead, he's reflecting on what already happened. And reflection, when it's uninterrupted, can lead to a deeper kind of awareness. This is where the emotional weight begins to shift. It's no longer just about missing the routine or the access you provided. It becomes about understanding what that routine meant, what your presence added to his life, how your energy shaped the space you were in. And once that understanding starts to form, it doesn't easily go away. He may begin to compare subtly, often without realizing it. Interactions with others might feel different, not necessarily worse, but not the same. Conversations may lack a certain depth. Moments may feel slightly incomplete. And it's in those quiet comparisons that your absence becomes more defined, not as something dramatic, but as something meaningful. There's also a kind of stillness that comes with this stage. The initial reactions have passed. The attempts to distract or replace what's missing have slowed down. And now there's just time to think, time to feel, time to sit with the reality that something ended, and it ended in a way he didn't fully understand at the moment. That's when regret can begin to take shape. Not always as a strong, overwhelming emotion, but as a quiet recognition, a realization that there were things he didn't fully appreciate, moments he didn't fully engage in, efforts he may have taken for granted. This kind of regret doesn't need to be spoken out loud to be real. It exists in the way he looks back, in the way he reinterprets the past with a clearer lens. But it's important to understand that this process is not about punishment. It's not about making someone feel bad for what they didn't do. It's about the natural outcome of distance and reflection. When something meaningful is no longer present, the mind tries to make sense of it. And in doing so, it often uncovers truths that weren't fully visible before. For you, this stage holds a different kind of significance. While he is beginning to process the weight of what was lost, you've already moved through the earlier phases. The questioning, the effort, the internal conflict, you faced those before you left. Your silence wasn't the beginning of your healing. It was part of the outcome of it. That's why your path looks different now. While he's looking back, you're looking forward. While he's connecting the dots of what happened, you've already accepted the picture they formed. And that difference in timing matters, because it means you're no longer in the same emotional space. Even if the memories are shared, there may be moments where he feels the urge to reach out, to break the silence, to reconnect in some way. Not always with a clear intention, but with a sense that something meaningful was left behind. But by the time that feeling becomes strong enough to act on, The dynamic has already changed. You're no longer the same version of yourself that stayed, explained, or waited. And that's where the deeper lesson comes in. Moving on silently isn't about creating an impact on someone else. It's about honoring the impact something had on you and choosing to respond to it in a way that protects your peace. The fact that he may eventually feel the weight of that absence is not something you control. It's something that unfolds on its own. What matters is that you didn't stay in a space where your presence was not fully recognized. You didn't continue giving in a way that left you feeling unseen. You made a decision based on your experience, and you followed through with it, even when it required strength you may not have felt in the moment. Over time, both of you arrive at understanding, but from different directions. He reaches it through reflection after the loss. You reached it through realization before the departure. And that difference shapes everything that comes next, because while he's learning what your presence meant, you've already learned what your absence needed to become.